Welcome everyone on this hot day to one of the coolest rooms in Oxford and High Online. I'm delighted that we have today talking about how to be a good knowledge neighbour, Chris Barton, who is, helpfully because he's put on there, an assistant clinical professor at the School of Conservation Features in ASU, assistant director, Centre for Biodiversity Outcomes ASU, and program manager Hawaii and the Pacific Executive Administrator ASU. And he has confirmed that today in Oxford is hotter than Phoenix, Arizona.
Yes.
So well done in making all of this. I've been told this is an absolutely fascinating talk. So delighted you can all come. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me here. And thanks for those of you who relocated the talk into the air-conditioned basement. So I appreciate that. I know that's meant that a lot of you could come, because I would not have blamed you if you hadn't come. It was an unanswered. So my name is Chris. I am all of those things. And I'm here to talk about how to be a good knowledge neighbor. And I've heard that you all are a friendly audience, and I hope that's true, because I am, rather than talking about, the work that I've done in the past, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about kind of a problem that we have been confronting a lot at ASU, something that we've been working through a lot in our own work. And we've got some thinking on it, and that I hope you'll find interesting, but I'm also kind of looking for any insights you have, any feedback. I figured a audience that was not just an ASU audience would be an interesting way to kick around some ideas. So without further ado, or maybe some more ado, hold on. There we go. Okay, so this is where I work. This is the Walton Center for Planetary Health at Arizona State University in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. Big, beautiful building, lots of windows, well designed in the desert. This is where some of my most important collaborators work. This is the Hokulea, which is a traditional Hawaiian voyaging canoe, and they sail it around the Pacific. If you've seen Moana, it's that. They are using traditional Polynesian voyaging techniques to take this canoe all around the Pacific. And while they do that, they do a bunch of advocacy for various environmental and indigenous rights stuff, and I help them with that. These are very different places, as you might guess. A traditional canoe in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, things look very different there than they do in a nice shiny building in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. And so I actually spend a lot of my time thinking about how we work effectively with people from other knowledge systems. Because there's one knowledge system present in this building here, and there's another knowledge system present on this va'a. And a lot of my job is actually translating back and forth between them to make sure that the people over here understand the importance of what they're doing and vice versa. And so we think, how do we effectively collaborate with people from other knowledge systems? And lately, we've been thinking about that less in terms of a process, more in terms of building relationships. So rather than how do we effectively collaborate, how do we be a good knowledge neighbor, that we've been calling it. So quickly, what is a knowledge system? I threw that idea out. This is an idea I'm borrowing from Brian Brayboy, and his idea is basically that everything we know, everything we think we know, depends on how we understand the answers to these questions and more. Right? Questions such as, thank you, Leah. Questions such as, where are we? What physical location are we? What is our ontology? How do we fit into that which is? What can we know about what is? How do we learn about what is? How do we teach what we know? What should we do with what we know? And how does what we know shape our world? Now, clearly, these are not easy questions. There's no right answer to any of these. And Brian's point in this paper is that all of the knowledge we have, and all of the knowledge that we use, and all the knowledge that we share with each other, is built on our understanding of our own personal answers to these questions. And so when you're trying to translate between a canoe in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and a nice shiny building in the Sonoran Desert, it's not just transferring a bit of information. It's transferring all of this. All of this baggage comes along with it. And so these are two examples of us kind of putting this into practice. This is my RA, Meredith Grady, with some of her respondents in southern Kenya. And this is me a couple of weeks ago on Pongso no Dao, which is a little island off the coast of Taiwan, hanging out with this guy, Xiaomin Pongden, who is a indigenous writer and poet. And these are both examples of the kind of work that we do in conservation. We are constantly interacting with people who are very different from us, who come from different backgrounds. And we do this work. We talk with these people. We collaborate. But we don't often think about what we're bringing to this. So the neighboring strategy that we deploy depends on what our own knowledge system is. And we all deploy a neighboring strategy, but we don't often get a chance to really reflect on what it is and why we're deploying that one versus maybe another one. And so with that framing, we engaged on a pretty extensive, though certainly not finished, literature review of the ways that people from various disciplines approach this problem and suggest that we work with people from other knowledge systems. And we've identified sort of 5 categories here, which we're calling neighboring strategies. And we'll walk through each of these, but quickly to kind of explain the graphics. You've got 2 different neighboring strategies, 2 different knowledge systems, one blue, one red, and this is just sort of a graphic interpretation of how one might interact with them. D-link is the first one, and the simplest one, really, because this is the sort of good fences make good neighbors approach to neighboring. Just sort of leave us alone, don't talk to us, we don't want anything to do with your knowledge system. The best example of this out in the world is called North Sentinel Island, which you might be familiar with, an island in the Indian Ocean, populated by peoples who have emphatically made clear that they do not want contact with anyone else. People show up, they tend to chase them off the island or even kill them if they try to stay too long. And so very little is known about the people who live there, and they like that. And so their strategy is just de-link. Take your knowledge system and go, we don't want it here. This is difficult or impossible for most of us because we live in an interconnected, globalized world. We live in Anthropocene. We're all sort of interconnected in some way. But there are parts of the literature that advocate for a return to this strategy. And why you might want to choose this strategy? Well, if your axiology, what you do with the knowledge you have, is that you protect it, then this is a great way to do that. Keep others out, keep people away, so you can accomplish your goal of maintaining the fidelity of your own knowledge system. On the other hand, this is perhaps the most popular or most prevalent knowledge system, or neighboring strategy, which is integration moving into blending. So the idea is you have 2 knowledge systems, they sort of interact, one might get sort of like involved, subsumed in the other because one is just sort of more dominant. But the idea is that eventually they'll harmonize. You'll go from blue and red to purple. You'll take elements of each and you'll find some new shared knowledge system. There's a lot of examples of this from the literature. Ideas such as 2-eyed seeing, standpoint epistemology, situated knowledges. Some of you might be familiar. There's a bibliography at the end of this if you would like to read more on any of these. Some notable dynamics of this model is that it's very popular, especially in conservation, where we talk about the incorporation of indigenous knowledges or traditional ecological knowledge. Oftentimes the assumption is that you have dominant knowledge, you have traditional ecological knowledge, and they're just going to work out and harmonize in some way. We're going to get to some shared blended knowledge system. But in order to do that, you need a bit of humility. You need to sort of understand that entering into a situation where you're working across knowledge systems, you don't know everything. Your people you're working with have interesting insights, have useful insights, and you need to sort of negotiate which pieces of information, which aspects of each other's knowledge system are quote unquote right, and can be assimilated into the blended one. Why you might choose this strategy? Well, if you believe that there's a singular world, singular ontology, but different epistemologies and methodologies, so we're all trying different things to try and get at the same shared world that we all inhabit, then this makes a lot of sense, right? If you think of the the metaphor of like the blind man and the elephant. One of them is holding onto the tail and thinks it's a rope, and one's holding onto the nose or the trunk and thinks it's a hose. They all have part of the picture, and if they put it all together, they all have different methodologies, and if you put them all together, you're going to understand a single ontology. But this is not given. It's definitely not a given answer in the literature that there is a single ontology, that we all share the same world. And so this is sort of an assumption you have to start with in order for this to make sense. But if you have these assumptions, you might be working toward the goal of sharing knowledge to uncover the truth. The other version of the integration strategy is erasure, where you have one knowledge system, you interact with another knowledge system, and you just erase it. One of them takes over. Examples of this, colonialism, great example. That was a lot of what we did, is we went places and told them they were wrong and that we were right and they should follow our knowledge system. A more recent example is the structural adjustment programs of the World Bank and IMF, where they say, we are the economists, we know how your economy should function, we're going to show up and we're going to impose a certain economic model on your economy. Notable dynamics of this one is that this is sort of the old model of conservation. We have luckily sort of evolved to be thinking more about blending, but a lot of our the conservation actions that were taken at the beginning of conservation relied on this model. I also think it's important to point out that this erases useful knowledge. If we're assuming that there is something valuable about the knowledge system that we are blending, and we get rid of it, we have lost that as a resource. We have lost that insight into our world. But, if you might still choose the strategy if you believe that ontology is singular, you all share the same world, and epistemology methodology is singular. If there's only one way to access the truth. One world we all share with one way to access the truth, then people in the red knowledge system are just wrong. It was wrong, right? So we don't need to hold on to that false knowledge. Right? And if you adhere to this, your goal might be to distribute knowledge, to inform people of the truth, kind of a missionary approach to knowledge integration. Then we have hybridization. I think this one is quite exciting. So examples of this might be code switching. That idea about how in certain contexts, you might speak a certain way or act a certain way to fit into that knowledge system, and then you go back home and you talk a different way or act a different way. Co-production, I think, I don't know if you're all familiar with that, this idea that the right way to address research questions is to work with the end users of that research. I believe it's an example of this. And then participatory action research is also, I think, representative of this strategy. So notable dynamics here is that you've got two knowledge systems, and you work to blend them in a certain way, in a certain context, in a certain place, for a certain reason. But acknowledging that that is limited, and you're going to return back to working in your initial knowledge systems later. Okay. So this basically creates a bespoke sandbox for collaboration on a problem or for working in a specific place. I think that this is what a lot of people do when they go to a place like Oxford from Arizona and attempt to create a sort of hybrid knowledge system here in this room so we can all understand each other and work on this issue. But recognizing that I'm going to go home to Arizona, where there's a different knowledge system that I inhabit, and the rest of you are going to stay here, and that's fine. This is difficult to do without addressing questions of power, right? Because the negotiation of how this turns purple, right, is not trivial. How this blending happens is something that, in instances where this is effective, is very purposefully thought about and engaged in a very structured manner. Participatory action research being a good example of that. And why you might choose this strategy? Well, I think this is most useful if you believe that ontology, epistemology, methodology, knowledge, if you will, is tied to place. Right? So when I go to Pengzhou Nodao off the coast of Taiwan, I am there is something about that place that is unique. There's a different way of seeing the world there. But I'm coming there for a reason. I'm coming there because they wanted to work with me, and I want to bring parts of my knowledge system to there to work in that place. So when I went out to Taiwan, I was working, kind of developed a knowledge system there between myself and my partners that helped us address a particular problem in that place. It was bespoke for that. And when we leave that place, we no longer assume that this is necessarily valid. And so the goal of this knowledge system, the goal of this neighboring strategy is to enable collaboration without necessarily having to have full agreement on all points. You can sort of say, hey, we're going to work together. We're going to assume that this is the case, but I'm still inhabit red knowledge system over here. And last here we have exchange. And this is sort of, I think this is the most exciting one personally. This is sort of where I land, my neighboring strategy, with the idea that you have different knowledge systems. They might interact, and those who inhabit each of them can sort of pick and choose what they want to incorporate with their own without fully integrating, without fully separating. The knowledge systems are evolving, they're changing, they can learn from each other, but that does not mean that they're going to converge. Right? Examples of this are the Amish, right? The Amish are notorious for sort of rejecting modern technology, but that's not actually what they do. What they do is they make very principled decisions about which elements of technology they want to incorporate into their culture based on whether or not it feels like it furthers the way that they want to be in the world, furthers their knowledge system. The Zapatistas, if you're familiar, sort of a indigenous group from southern Mexico, they have a whole theoretical program about how to do this. Their idea is un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos, a world in which many worlds fit. That is what they are trying to create. So acknowledging that there are many knowledge systems and we can all learn from each other, we can all share the same space, it does not mean that we all have to for coexistence without conformity. This does require a degree of sovereignty, the degree of being able to make choices about what knowledge you incorporate, what knowledge you don't. The Zapatistas, for instance, basically went to war with the Mexican government over this in order to have the sovereignty to decide which elements of Mexican society they wanted to incorporate into their way of being in the world and which ones they didn't. And so you might choose this strategy if you believe that ontology and epistemology are plural. We all sort of inhabit our own worlds, and the ways that we learn about those worlds are unique to each of us. But also, you believe that there's importance for open-handed sharing of information between knowledge systems. This being that you can share, you offer your resources to others, but it's up to them about whether or not they take it. And so engaging in this neighboring strategy, I think the goal is often the adaptation of knowledge systems, the adaptation of your own knowledge system to whatever situation you're dealing with. I mean, the world changes, knowledge systems probably have to change as well, but also the propagation of knowledge systems. The idea that if a group of people start seeing things differently, they just kind of go off and have their own knowledge system, and that's okay. The propagation of different ways of seeing the world, as long as they're in conversation with each other, is just sort of part of what it means to be in relation with each other on this planet. And so those are the 5 categories of knowledge systems that we came up with. Probably not complete, and if you have any other strategies you can think of that don't fit into these categories, just let me know. As you pointed out, we came to this work via the insight that the reasons why we might choose to engage in one of these knowledge systems over the other, one of these neighboring strategies over the other, has to do with elements of our own knowledge system. How we understand our place in the world and how we should act within it informs our strategies we take when interacting with others. And so acknowledging that these questions, such as what is, have more than two answers, we tried to simplify this into a bit of a useful process by which somebody could step through this to sort of make a choice about how they want to interact with others. I was very tentative to put this up because, like, this is a comical oversimplification of questions and ideas that, like, we've been working on since the dawn of language, right? So, giant asterisk. But I wanted to try and also make it useful and make it legible for somebody who sort of wanted to critically analyze, like, okay, what do I believe and how does that inform how I should interact with others? And that's it. There's my bibliography. If you want it, I'll also share this with anybody else. I think I'll probably leave it at this so you can look at it. But what do you think? What did I miss?
I had a question. You were very clear in what sort of circumstances you use one or the other. What about these big projects, sometimes internationally, which you are trying to pull language and knowledge together that respond to many of these models at the same time? You, for example, if you go for the global assessment of climate, talking biodiversity, in which there is the genuine intention to, I don't know what verbs to use because there's this,
Yeah.
to pull together.
Yeah.
The knowledge systems and the epistemologies and the goals and everything are very, very different people. You have Western established science, you have some people who are indigenous and happy to share. Some people are indigenous and not happy at all to share, and they want to be at the table. Then you have, the multiple evidence base that is one particular methodology used by some groups. You have a number of models working together. Do you believe it can work? And how you go about it?
That's a good question. I think that there's probably a strategy inherent in the process by which those collaborations happen. And whether that is one that aligns with the strategy that each individual coming to the process brings, I mean, I would be surprised if it did. I mean, there's like I said, there's so much diversity. I think that probably the aspiration is something like this, where we need to create the global report on climate change. We disagree on a lot of stuff, but we're all going to come together at COP, and we're going to try and put together something there. And I think the degree to which that is successful depends on these questions of power about how this turns purple. How is this integrated? What is the process by which the these two knowledge systems are brought together? So is it possible? I'd like to think so. Is it as easy as we think it is? Definitely not. I think it probably requires a lot more assessment. However, I should point out that there are people like in the bibliography I cite Nadasdy, who is sort of infamous for saying like, no, actually it's not. There's no way to carry information or knowledge from one into a shared knowledge system without loss of important context and important aspects of it. So Huh?
First bit. I couldn't agree more strongly with the first bit.
Yeah.
The Nadasdy thing, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, like, I mean, that's my opinion, and others disagree.
Really awesome. Thank you. I don't know if this is actually different, but is there potentially another one that's influence, which is like a raise, but where the smaller knowledge system or less dominant is aiming to influence the larger one? So the aim is that the smaller one stays the same.
Ooh.
And the larger one shifts slightly. I was thinking it ties into the, for example, where Indigenous peoples are coming into the table kind of with no intention to change their own knowledge system, but with a hope that the more dominant knowledge system will take on aspects of their way of seeing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mixture of them. I'm not sure if it's actually different.
Yeah, I that's an interesting question, and you know, there's a thread of research, there's a thread of literature that's like a lot of this is about the indigenous knowledge systems. That's kind of the reason why a lot of people write about this. And there's a thread of research that's about like we need to make indigenous knowledges look like Western science. That's, you know, sort of the traditional ecological knowledge angle, I think. But there's also, I think this is what you're getting at, an angle of people who are like, no, actually, we need to like indigenize Western science. We need to like re-provincialize this idea that like Western science is a indigenous knowledge system of Western Europe, and so like re-influence how we think about that. So maybe it's sort of a sub strategy under here where it's like there's a particular way in which like red knowledge system is like trying to, you know, actively influence.
In a graphic like this, it would be that the red is outside, and so the blue is shifting from blue to purple without the red shifting. I think that's the key difference.
Yeah, okay. I like this.
Is where, yeah, and I don't know if it ever happens, but just thinking it feels like something that some people are trying to do, but I definitely couldn't give you a reference for that.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's very helpful.
Thanks so much for your talk, and I really like the framework, and I can see how even just reflecting on these ideas for practitioners could probably yield some really useful outcomes. But I was curious, when you were designing or thinking about developing a framework like this, what were your goals? What were the sort of intended outcomes or things that could see for having this place?
Yeah, I mean, I want everybody who we send out in the field to work with people who are different than them to at least try and walk through this. You know, it's like I said, it's not going to necessarily reach anything conclusive, but I want them to be thinking about it before they go out there. And that's not even necessarily that like I'm going to like somebody might walk through this and end up at erasure, right? And like that's a problem. Like I'm not going to be happy about that, right? But at least they're explicit about it rather than just it being part of their practice without having ever really thought about why it is that way. You know, there's a version of this that we've thought about where like I tend to feel like this is where I land, right? And you know, there's a version of this that's like, okay, well, how do I backtrack? What do I have to convince people of to get them to that point? But you know, it sort of goes against the ideal of pluralism to like be pushing it. But our main goal with this and with the paper that's coming out of it is basically like people are probably not thinking about this enough before they head out into the field. And here is a structured way to start thinking about it, where you potentially go out there and do something that you would not have done if you had thought about it beforehand.
Process exclusive between them. I would like to hear from you. If two processes can happen at the same time, how can you see two processes or at the same time?
Yeah, I think it does. 'Cause these are not. I mean, they're strategies that they're institutionalized. They're personal strategies that could become processes, right? So I'm heading out into the field trying to do this. And I know for a fact that some of the people I work with, like Xiamen Rapongin in Taiwan, he's trying to do this. He's like, actually, I know what it means to be Dao. And I know that you are coming from Arizona, and we're going to work together on a thing. But I'm actually not interested in like becoming more like you. I'm interested in accomplishing this. So I think that these are ways we show up. These are so we frame this around like how we're trying to build these relationships. But just because I'm showing up like this does not mean that everybody is. Right? And so there is a process of like these happening all at once, and there being some tension between that. And I think that's probably something like this happening at the scale of us all trying to work on something like a climate assessment. Is everyone's coming with a different strategy, and we're not all in agreement about how we're approaching the situation. And I don't really have an answer about how we might get to that point. But did that answer? I feel like it didn't answer your question. I don't know if the question is answerable.
I'm so very like big thoughts. So
Good.
yeah, like very big they don't use it. But I think something that I'm just kind of thinking about is how when we speak about knowledge in this kind of an environment, in this academic, you're coming from a university to this university, there's already I would say quite a specific type of knowledge that we're talking about.
Mhm.
In this case, it is that of the academic kind of Western science and all academic one system that we're all kind of engaging in this room, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of I struggle with that when we kind of only speak amongst ourselves. And I feel like there's already within academia kind of a our way is the best way. And I've just come back from doing research and doing field work back home in Cape Town. And something that I'm not too sure how one addresses this, what has built up over centuries, the system of one kind of dominant knowledge.
Yeah.
That it just continues to grow. The knowledge of erasure. I think something that's also missing is stealing knowledge. So knowledge that was, not just erased, but knowledge that was taken to benefit during the colonial times, the colonial powers. So I think that does continue in some ways now, still in modern day. So that's kind of just the attention I have with this kind of topic. But also I see the need for us to think of each other as neighbors, as people who are in exchange all the time. And so I'm wondering from your kind of personal, you show pictures of the people who you're working with and these kind of questions of power will be coming in, as someone from a Western background, the white race, and in my case, when I'm coming as someone who's studying at this institution,
as someone who's light skinned, as someone who has lived a privileged life in the context of my home country.
Yeah.
I feel like it's really difficult to negotiate those power imbalances when maybe university is such a powerful, institution.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know from your kind of personal experiences, how you navigate that, and what is your kind of, what is the work of the papers like Body and Mind or Heart or something.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is also, it's not just what's in the head, it's like what we embody, all of these things. So yeah, if you just like, how do you kind of negotiate your power when you're working with these people who you're trying to kind of collaborate with?
Yeah. I mean, so one thing is, like I said, I fit here, and part of this like open-handed sharing. Like, what do we have a thing to offer? I have a thing to offer. I feel like I have a thing to offer. That not everybody wants, and a lot of people don't. And those who do kind of want it on their own terms. So a good example of that, right, is work at university. I've been working with these folks for 5 years now. I have never published a paper on or with them. I never will. They don't care. And that's not my knowledge, and that's not what we're working towards as a group there. And that has had consequences, right? Like, I spend a significant chunk of my time working with these folks, and I'm lucky enough to be in ASU where this isn't as much of an issue, because we have sort of different incentive structures. But I know for a fact that if I was at a more traditional university and I was spending half my time hanging out on a boat in the Pacific and not like producing any academic projects around it, like that would not bode well for my career. It still might not bode well for my career. We'll see. But it's the right thing to do, I think. And it's because that's the terms on which they were willing to accept me as a partner. I don't know if that answered your question. It's a similar sort of situation, I think, with when I go out, I want to work with these folks. Meredith is, was lucky enough to have already established a high degree of trust with this community. And so, when she shows up and says like, hey, I'm going to do some research on this thing, they're interested in the outcomes of that as well. And so, they can collaborate on producing academic work that they both see the value in. But she also makes a point of she's got to bring what she learns there back to them and make it useful for them and their lives as well. I think it's a case-by-case thing a lot, but I think it helps to not enter situations with this mindset and be more, I think, one of these, or maybe this. I think that's also problematic. Did that answer your question? Or get close? We can talk later if you want.
Let's do the last question. Slide. One question about so this lending, what about this inspiration?
Instead of blending, what if we chose the mosaic form of integration? Ooh. I like that. I'm not sure I can conceptualize what that means at the edges between the mosaic pieces.
I had to look it up. The same pretends the character of 6 about raising to
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that. I don't think I have a response to that right now, but Vivek, you have given me some homework to do. I'm gonna go think about that and see how that fits into all of this. So is that time? We up?
I should just back in on these comments.
Well, the building seems to be on fire, right? Oh, okay. Thank you.
It's actually like you know, I'm going back to this knowledge system options. I was brainstorming, and of course, this is the beginning of thinking about this, and you know, this is evolving. I wonder if that there might be 3 areas. For example, you know, the categorization might have multiple colors that they all come together, but I'm thinking about your comments somehow. What comes out is something different, but then the blue and the red still exist in their own form. But I'm just wondering if there's some mechanism to retain, you know, I'm thinking about the mosaic or your point of retaining. Is there I feel that there must be a way to do this while retaining the original knowledge system, while also learning from each other without changing each other's knowledge systems. Right? Like we're learning about it to produce something, but we're not necessarily. Do we always have to change? Does it always have to lead to something? That was one question. And the other, just to bring it over, is why is this important?
Well, we'll get to the first one. I feel like a lot of things that want to not change. I mean, the only one of these that doesn't, there's the only two that don't involve change are these, right? Either just don't interact with each other or somebody's getting erased. I think change, there's a phrase that I really like from Mignolo about bidirectional and risky knowledge exchange, and how you know there's got to be risk involved in this process. Like you've got to enter this process acknowledging that this is risky for you and that you might leave it change in ways that you didn't necessarily think that you were going to. Why is this important? Kind of like I alluded to earlier, I feel like we don't think about this before we do it. Everybody sits here somewhere, but we don't think about why we sit where we sit and why we sit there. And so my hope is that, you know, if we have people going through this process before they engage in, I mean, really any work, specifically in conservation work, because conservation takes you to new places to interact with new people, you know, we will maybe, you know, find ourselves as a discipline or as a field, maybe aligning ourselves with one of these. But at least we will be explicit about why we're doing things the way that we're doing. And you know, we have a new school of conservation at ASU. Little plug for us. We have a new school of conservation at ASU, and we're trying to integrate indigenous knowledges into trying to figure out how do we integrate indigenous knowledges into the curriculum in a way that is respectful and possible, and you know takes into account all of these factors and power and everything. And we're not thinking about this. Everybody on the curriculum, everybody in the school seems to be approaching this in different ways. And as a result, we're running into issues where we're realizing that we are taking different strategies to doing the same work. So ideally, you know, a institution could decide, hey, actually, we're going to do it this way. This is the strategy we're taking.
It's sort of more at the concept knowledge, I think, about integrating, which is
where is this being extracted? Where does that sit? So, but obviously it's not what we're trying to go for, but it certainly exists. So the extractive model, and then also just the tokenism model of engaging indigenous people, but it's not really any of these things. It's sort of maybe it's a subcomponent, but one or two of these things. But just curious what your thoughts are on that. It's certainly one to see what you say of that often.
Yeah. It's a good point. It's something we need to think about. In my conceptualization of this, these are knowledge systems that incorporate all of this, right? And I'm not sure you can tokenize this and incorporate it into your own way of seeing the world without that risky exchange, right? We can take a piece of knowledge and extract that, but Brian's point is that when you take a piece of knowledge without all of the baggage that comes with it, I mean, that is extractive, right? But you're also missing out on why that knowledge is the way it is. I'll use an example from Taiwan again. There's certain fish they can eat at different times of year. And this is sort of baked into their cosmology and into their axiology and into their technology too, because they have boats that decompose. And so later on in the year, they actually can't go fishing for certain fish. The traditional ecological knowledge insight from that is that this limits the take of particular fish so that they can recover at different times of year, so that the ecosystem as a whole, they never take too many of any particular fish, and the ecosystem as a whole remains healthy. So there's information in there about the breeding cycles of the fish and about like the environments of the reef and etc. And so you can take that out, and you can extract that, and you can use it for policy planning. But you're missing out on all of this other like reasoning behind why they do that. And I mean, that's, I think, a loss. That's, I think, where we're shortchanging ourselves and our ability to understand each other. But also, it's just like this is why Nadasdy, which was in the list, says that this is possible. Like, you can't actually integrate knowledges because you have to agree on things like what is. Like, we're always going to be just sort of extracting bits and pieces from each other, because unless we sort of figure out how to harmonize our knowledge systems. I think we're out of time. Thank you all for coming. This was fun. I have some interesting things to think on, so thank both of you. And if anybody has any questions or wants to chat, that's my email. And I will actually be here until the 30th. So if anybody wants to meet in person, I am here.